TransPro, do you want to introduce them now, Brad, or do they have a spot on our agenda?
Sure. Yeah, they are on the agenda. And I'll go ahead and introduce them when we get there.
Okay. All right. Well, I see no one here for a public comment. And if I could have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of August 6th. Move approval.
Second.
We've had a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Trish, you have information on our school park.
I do. Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome.
I'd like to share with you each the proposal for our FY19 scorecard metrics. So we are very close to completing our first year with the performance count scorecard, and it's time to look at the improvements that we want to set for ourselves in our performance for the coming year. Several of these metrics were measured for the very first time this year, helping us set a benchmark. For example, the community sentiment survey score, our employee engagement survey. So in some cases, we are looking to improve on our performance over our historical performance, and in some cases, our first-time benchmark performance. In other cases, we have set our performance goal improvements to external benchmarks, whether that be ABBG or APTA or peer benchmarking. Several of these you will see are from surveys, for example, the fixed route paratransit surveys, which give us the Net Promoter Score and the overall customer satisfaction, which we're going to hear about today. We have just gotten those results, so we are looking at them right now, and we'll be determining an appropriate improvement in that performance very shortly. So that will be on the draft that we put in front of the board later in the month. So what we're asking for today is for your review and recommendation to the board that they approve this FY19 set of performance metrics.
Okay. Well, Brad, do you want to speak to it? I mean, it's a lot to look at, and are we going to go item by item through them, or?
Well, first of all, we had this concept that since we hope to keep implementing this performance scorecard to oversee an action-oriented but performance-oriented tool to help the organization keep improving. We thought, it's my idea, that this be reviewed and approved at the executive committee level of PSTA board, because as you've all seen every quarter as we present it to the full PSTA board, there's been a lot of comments, questions, clarification, by board members about the individual metrics that are on that are down the list, and we've been talking about how whether or not that is really the appropriate level, or is that the appropriate response that the board level should be receiving, or should be focused on, or not. I think when we heard from TransPro originally to help us develop the scorecard, the idea was that the board would be very focused on the strategic initiatives, the strategic high-level goals that are listed down the left-hand side of the scorecard. I'm sorry, I would like to copy
yes,
that. I don't have them memorized yet, although I looked at the posters, but I keep focusing on Bill Jones's face on the poster. Community support, financial stability, customer satisfaction, employee engagement, and commitment to performance. The idea would be that those would stay fairly constant from year to year. Over a longer period of time, one or two might change, but that those are pretty apple pie kind of important things I think that the board does focus on. The individual metrics that we track are not necessarily the most important thing for the board to have a lot of discussion on. I think some discussion is good to try to understand whether they are good measures of those high-level strategies. But in general, it's really my idea that the executive committee and then would lead in the annual approval of the scorecard, just as my own strategy to try to get the board to focus on the high-level strategies. We're going to be hearing from Transpro in just a second, and from Trish, about two very important new components to the scorecard, which were our surveys. In addition to the scorecard, over the last year, we've done 3 different surveys for the first time really ever that are measuring satisfaction or engagement for basically our 3 customers: our employees, our riders, and the community at large, the taxpayers, with a phone survey. And we have 2 we've completed now all 3 of those surveys, and we're going to present 2 of them to you today. So the goal last year was just to get the surveys done. And so now they're done. And so then from now on, they're going to be key components to the scorecard, the results. Because we're going to keep doing the surveys every single year and seeing how the results improve. And I think those surveys are very, very sort of symbolic of what Transpro set us up for this scorecard from the beginning, that it's really based on outcomes. It's not based on effort. You know, the survey of how the community at large, the phone survey, you know, what involved, what role, what effect does an individual employee of PSTA have on community sentiment about public transportation? Probably not much direct influence. Same thing on employee engagement or anything else. But we do a lot of work, but whether it's successful or not is, you know, really the only thing that's important. It's the outcome that's important. If the survey comes back and says that the customers are less satisfied, no matter what our efforts are, then we have, you know, it's perception. We have to acknowledge that and try new initiatives. Same thing that we put on here for the legislative initiatives. I had a big argument in Tallahassee with my favorite people, our lobbyists. I said, you know, we have on our performance scorecard to...
Brad, hold on 1 second, please. You just mentioned the word legislative initiative, and I'm struggling to find the word legislative on here.
Okay, org number 4.
Org 4.
We have a performance goal.
Okay, thank you.
We have a performance goal that sets that we would accomplish 2 legislative initiatives in the coming year. And the lobbyist said, "Well, Brad, you cannot do that." I was like, "Well, I can do that." They were like, "Well, you can do that, but it's not fair because you have no idea." Well, we all know that what happens in Tallahassee is not necessarily related to anything related to merit of an initiative or common sense or anything. You know, it might have to do with a million of other things. And they said you can't necessarily say that we're a good lobbyist or a bad lobbyist if we don't accomplish 2 initiatives. And my response was, well, that is the outcome. I mean, that we are paying you, or the community is paying you to have success here. Now, there may be a million other things that you can document about why something didn't get passed or something changed that are very valid and that we will certainly take into consideration when evaluating your performance. But I mean, the outcome is the outcome. What, you know.
So may I just ask, I want to make sure that I'm understanding. On this particular one, it says the legislative initiative and our performance goal was 2, right? Then the goal points, it says 5. What does the 5 refer to?
The right-hand column is just a sort of order of magnitude in order to allocate points so that it equals 100 down at the bottom. Out of 100.
So the 5 is an arbitrary number that we just kind of made up to make it add up at the end?
Well, as you can see, we put 25 points for community support. We allocated 25 points for financial stability, 25 points for customer satisfaction, and 15 and 10. So then we allocated those to 4 or 5 goals per section. It's pretty even, with a few exceptions, but yeah. So if we are successful at accomplishing 2 legislative initiatives, then we would get 5 points in that category.
So I would, tell me if this is correct, I would venture to say that, and this is some strategies you might use when talking to our advocates, the lobbyist folks in Tallahassee. We actually achieved that goal and more this last year
We did.
based on our efforts in the legislature, both at the state and the federal level, as well as the dollars that we were able to pull in as a result of those relationships and those efforts. Is that right? Am I
Yes,
putting it
yes.
properly? And to that point, I'm assuming that because we are the lead support group for TBARTA, and in establishing that memorandum of understanding, we set PSTA up to be the leaders of the transit momentum within the region. I mean, that is huge.
Yeah.
And to me, that overcompensates for any other negative you could possibly say, because we all know what a real heavy lift the effort has been, and the effort within the legislature, but at the end of the day, it speaks to the relationships that we're building, both at the
Exactly.
state and the federal level. And I just want to say publicly a shout out to my partners here to my left, Commissioner Rice and Commissioner Torga, because they've been so intimately involved in developing those relationships, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Right? So, to public advocate people, tell them to just chill.
That's what I
And,
did.
you know, we have got our act together.
We do. We do.
And they shouldn't look at this as a negative, but an incredible positive. So I think for next
agree.
year, we up that 2 to maybe a 4.
Well, if we can take credit for the T-Barta ones too, then I would feel
But-
okay.
Well, wait a minute, I think we have to more than take credit for it, Brad,
I do
because
too.
we implemented it, think about it, in the middle of the year. It was never even on our radar when we started out in January. It was an opportunity that presented itself out of a big fat lemon
Yeah.
that landed in our lap, and we were creative enough to figure out how to make it into lemonade. Right in the middle of the year. I mean, I don't know if people appreciate the work that our staff has done, but they definitely deserve enormous credit for not only their willingness to attack that issue, but the way in which they went about it. I mean, I am just super duper impressed with our staff. Debbie's not even here to hear me talk about it, but
I think she told me that her windows aren't being put in, so maybe she'll be here. I don't know.
putting in new windows and doors.
Yeah.
Just tell the world what she's doing. But I I'm just saying, you know, everybody deserves a lot of credit, and we shouldn't be shy about highlighting that, because God knows when something doesn't go so right, we certainly get all the flack from it.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's a good example, I think, of, you can put this under the column of regionalism working. I mean, we're stepping up to help with the regional group when they were looking for additional help after the executive director's departure. It's not the story that gets told, it's not the sexy story in the media, but it's an important story.
Yeah.
Maybe we ought to go pay a little visit to Mr. Nickens and bring him up to date.
Maybe we should. I agree.
I think that's not a bad idea. We just don't spend enough time talking about the good stuff.
Well, and that's what this scorecard is really all about. You know, there's some critics even within the PSTA organization to this idea that we rank ourselves on a scale of 1 to 100, or give points for all this, and people debate whether it's worth 5 or 10 or whatever. Lots of performance evaluation things that we do don't have a score like that, so it's not that meaningful, but it just is a helpful.
Brad,
I think it's nice.
wait a minute.
And I think the board does generally like it to have something like this.
That is such an understatement. It's not that meaningful. And anybody that says that is totally uneducated about the process and how difficult it is to have a success story.
Yes, it gives us an opportunity to show our successes.
Commissioner
Yeah.
Rice?
Right, so, I mean, we know if something's not measured, it's not managed. And I think it's great that staff is having discussions about whether something's worth 4 points or 6 points. Those are really valuable conversations. And even if there's disagreement, it means that people are reflecting and talking about the value of our work in terms of how it's measured.
And what does success look
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, so that's where this tool, I mean, to me, that just really shows how valuable this tool is. I do have a couple of questions, either for Brad or Trish. I know that we've recently undertaken this process, but I was curious if what so far has maybe surprised you, or what have we learned from doing this project, this new scorecard? What has it told us that maybe we wouldn't have known or assumed?
Brad?
Well, I think one thing that has been an eye-opener for a lot of people is how interdepartmental our outcomes are. And you may have a metric that appears to live in one department with one set of people who influence it. And what we've discovered this year is that it's really a host of folks from different departments who have a really key influence over whether we're going to meet that metric. And being so transparent about what we're measuring and the interdepartmental conversations that we've been having about how to drive the performance in a particular metric, I think that's been an eye-opener for people.
So Trish, if I may, I think it would be very meaningful to the board at large if, when I assume you're going to give this presentation at the full board,
Yeah.
that you incorporate into your remarks the question that Commissioner Rice just asked you. What have we learned? You may be interested in what have we learned by going through this that we would have not known before, been aware of. And I think that's a very leveling thought process to assuage some of what we know is going to be what are we doing that for? Who said we were at 10? You know, that we get.
I will do that.
Yeah.
Commissioner Torga.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Exactly what Madam Chair and Commissioner have said. Exact, period, full force. Thank you very much for your comments.
Well, you are
Sweet.
just the best. Can
That
I
was
take
good.
you to all my board meetings?
That's perfect. I don't need to see.
So, Madam Chair, perhaps we didn't set the agenda up perfectly, because I would suggest that before before you take an action to recommend the scorecard to the board, since we have these presentations about the two meaty pieces of the scorecard, the surveys, we hear those first, just so you can kind of get a flavor for the richness of all the data that's really embedded in this, in their presentations, and then maybe take an action to approve it, to recommend it.
Have them speak
Yeah.
first, or Trish, after Trish, or before Trish?
I think Trish is also going to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And Commissioner Rice has another question,
Yes.
comment, or thought.
And I apologize if this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but so this scorecard represents what I would call lag indicators. And so the difference between a lead indicator and a lag indicator, you know, I'll use the example of running for office. We have no control over how many people end up voting, but we do have a control when running a campaign over how many phone calls we make, how many doors we knock on, how many events we set up. And the ultimate lag indicator is election day, when, you know, scoreboard time. So we don't have control over the lag result. Well, we control the lead indicators, which we don't see here. It struck me earlier when we were talking about Brad's conversation with our lobbyist, is they may be a little nervous about being held to an outcome that they feel like they can't control. But there's so many steps and things that they can do to help get us to that outcome. So they could certainly come back to us and say, listen, you know, we had 25 meetings, we spoke at these committee public hearings, there's all these things that you can do, so being held to those outcomes almost forces you, kind of backs you into being transparent about the many steps that we take. Does that make sense?
It makes sense if you think about the way in which we issue our RFP for our lobbying group, which is tremendously different today than it was 4 or 5 years ago, I should say.
Yeah.
And it occurs to me that in our legislative and executive are closely tied together, and I'm glad to see Commissioner Tonga is on both, because it helps to, get the message out. But I do think that there is a value each year after the legislature and sine die, that we have that wrap-up meeting with our advocates, and from that, determine what the measurements and standards will be for the next session. And that way, we can keep our measurements and standards for them accountable in terms of the product that we get from them.
Yeah.
So that we're always refreshing it and it doesn't stay the same. Do you know what I mean? Because the legislature changes every 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And to your point, I mean, we did, and it's Commissioner Rice's point too, that the new contract we have with both our federal and state government affairs teams has requirements in there that we measure on whatever you just call it, lag, or output, things that they have to do.
That is in there.
That is in their control. That they just have to do them, and we track that to make sure they're doing it. That's no guarantee of an outcome of success, but we think it has something to do with or else we wouldn't put it in there. We think it does lead, and it has shown to lead to success by our whole strategy. Yeah.
And even just pivoting to our core mission, okay, so our bus riders, they want buses that are on time. They want buses that are clean. Well, if they're not clean, what's happening? Well, maybe they're only getting clean once a month, so we know to, increase, that's pretty straightforward. Why buses may be late may be a little bit harder to figure out, but if people are spending a lot of time trying to fumble for a bus card and it slows down, the time of onboarding, then forces us to look at ways to make that transition of getting onto the bus quicker and easier. And those are just,
Yeah.
but I think this is great. I think this is, I want to take this back to St. Pete and say, see, this is what we should be doing in our departments.
Yeah.
And I've given initial reports to council when we first started this process, and I know my colleagues were very interested because we feel like this is exactly the type of thing we should be doing. So, thank you.
And on that note, perhaps we segue into the presentations where you'll find out that the writers don't care about the buses being cleaned, they really do care about on-time performance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to do customer survey first, or?
Well, no, well, however you will, I think you were going to do the
Yeah.
other one first, yeah. Chris, is that microphone on?
It's awfully loud, that's why I didn't have it on the whole time.
I didn't hear what she said.
The massive millions of people that watch these committee meetings, we've heard from a few of them that the audio is not very good in here.
It's not very good in here. I often have trouble hearing, and I'm in the room.
I know, I agree.
What did you say?
Being.
All right, well, I will try to speak nice and loudly for you and also for our viewers at home. As Brad said, we've just completed our first employee engagement survey. We contracted with CPS HR Consulting for this. Their expertise is public sector employee engagement. So we selected them because they have expertise in exactly the type of workplaces that we are trying to get a measurement on. So first I want to just briefly talk about what is employee engagement. Employee engagement is a measure of the connectedness that an employee feels to their employer and to their work. It's that connection and motivation that makes someone take the extra step, what's often called discretionary effort, to make sure that something is done well. And we all know that in any job, you can do the bare minimum, you can do what's written on paper, or you can do your job well, and that often requires taking that extra step. This is an example of a disengaged employee not taking that extra step to move the branch and make a nice straight line. And in our lives, we see the effect of this all the time. Why does engagement matter? We're not just trying to make our employees happy. Engagement actually affects bottom line metrics. It affects absenteeism. It affects safety incidents. It affects profitability and productivity, turnover. All of these things have a significant cost associated with them. And studies have shown that highly engaged workforces show much better performance in all of these areas. And of course, all of these things feed into the outcomes that we're measuring, whether we're talking about our budget adherence or our turnover, which is a metric on here. Our safety incidents, of course, are measured on at other levels in the departments. So employee engagement is very important, and it's not just about happy employees. Our process for improving employee engagement is more than just a survey. We have completed step one. We planned and set goals for our survey. We have completed the survey. Brad immediately shared the results with our employees. He held to a promise he had made when we initially met as a group and with the union to be very transparent about the results of the survey and about how we were going to proceed to address them. This afternoon, in fact, we're meeting as a leadership group. The executive team is getting together for a workshop with the vendor to analyze the results and develop an action plan. So that's our next step. We'll have a year-long set of initiatives that are targeting specific things that we've learned from the results. So by the time we do this survey next year, we will have some leading indicators to show us that we have put the effort into making a result in the outcome. One thing that was wonderful about our survey is that overall we had 55% of our employees respond, and that is higher than some of our regional neighbors who have done similar surveys even with the same vendor. That's important to us because taking the survey, regardless of your answer, shows that you believe your opinion matters to management. You believe that it matters what you say about how you feel about your company. That in itself is a sign of engagement. In addition to the 55% overall, we got 56% of our maintenance employees and 42% of our bus operators, which again are higher than the benchmarks that we've seen from other similar agencies in the area. Those are important areas for us to get responses from because they are our largest group of employees. And our revenue operators are the biggest direct factor that we have on the public, on our riders.
So Trish, I'd be interested in any thoughts that you might have, or Brad, on why that number is low. I mean, is the survey anonymous?
The survey is confidential. Yes.
Because we do that kind of a survey within county government, and I am always just super thrilled to see how the numbers keep going up, but our numbers are in the 80 percentile.
Yeah.
And so do you think that's the result of the fact that this is the first time we've ever done it, maybe? Is it the first time we've ever done it?
I do believe that that's part of it. If you've been doing surveys for several years, what you've been able to demonstrate to your employees is that changes happen as a result of the survey. Since this is our first ask of our employees to please tell us what you think, this year is critical for us because we have to demonstrate that what they said mattered. So in addition to looking at, which we'll see in a moment, the overall results, what percentage are engaged, partially engaged or not engaged, this is also an important metric for us to next year have a larger response. And we have to do that by demonstrating that it mattered that they responded and that we made visible changes based
So
on
it's
it.
striking to me that the higher up you go in the organizational structure, the larger your numbers is, and it leads me to believe that the folks that are the bus operators are not as engaged, and maybe that's because they're not physically in the plant and
Yeah.
interacting with everybody often enough.
I agree.
Right, I mean, that's exactly, you see the people that are in this building were close to 100%.
Yeah.
And then a bus operator, spends his or her entire day not here.
Right.
And this was an online, you had to fill this out online, so.
So there's a lack of a connection, a
Yeah,
little bit.
we did make computers available in the lounge for them to fill it out and send it to them in an email. But some of them don't even come to PSTA in daylight hours ever. They might go to Clearwater to start their shift, and then so 42% of the bus drivers was a lot higher than Hart, and that was really our goal.
What was their number?
17%.
What?
17% of drivers responded.
Wow.
And
Okay then.
Yeah, so it was pretty good.
And we utilized a multi-pronged communication strategy for this, which is important with communication with our drivers. So there were emails sent to them, there were letters in their mailbox personally from Brad, there were text messages and messages that were sent in the messaging system that's on the bus that they see when they're checking for updates. We had many hours
Yes,
of
Trish
computers
bombarded them.
available in the driver's lounge at all hours of the day, and it takes a multi-pronged communication strategy like that to reach these critical people in our employees.
So, what would you think of the idea if, once this comes to the board, if there was a letter from the board that went out in the bus operators?
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
I mean, I know we probably don't issue paid checks anymore, but hopefully there's something that they receive.
Yes. Yeah.
In a way that would be meaningful.
That
To
would
let them
be-
know how much we appreciate them being on the front line, because they are the directors of first impression
They are.
about who we are.
Exactly.
Can
I
we
think
do
that would be very meaningful.
What do you
Good.
think?
Yeah.
Good, like it, great idea.
So let them know that we are paying attention to what they had to say. Now, do we know what they said?
We do, yes.
Well, let's go.
Let's go. All right, so the chart that we're looking at here has the results for PSTA next to local and federal government benchmarks. and next to private sector benchmarks. And as you can see, we are largely on par with our government peers. That doesn't mean that we don't want to do better. We do. The green in the bottom, just to spell out the color code here, the green are employees who they have categorized as fully engaged. There was a 52-question questionnaire. Certain questions are weighted pertaining to specifically, are you engaged or not? They've got a complicated algorithm that figures it out. But how you answered, let them know, are you fully engaged? 29% of people are raring to go. They feel dedicated. They're going to make that extra effort. 44%, which is very close to our peers, are somewhat engaged. They're, kind of your middle of the pack group. And then we've got 28% of our respondents who they would classify as being not engaged. So those are folks who are feeling perhaps, some frustration, disappointment, et cetera, in different areas. And those are the people that we really want to target over this coming year. If you add the somewhat engaged and the fully engaged for our results, you have 73% of our respondents. In the government benchmark, you've got 75% of their respondents. Our goal for this FY19 is to match that. So we're going to stretch ourselves to try to pull 2% of our respondents out of that not engaged and into a better mindset about work. So that's going to be our target for the upcoming year. One of the things that CPS HR, our vendor, was able to share with us are what factors really drive engagement. So when we're looking to make changes, what areas are we targeting those changes in? And based on years of experience, lots of research into public sector engagement, these are the key factors. How do I feel about my work? How do I feel about PSTA's mission, my team, my supervisor, leadership, and the way change is managed at the organization? My opportunities for training and development, my feeling that there are enough resources and people and tools that I can effectively do my job, and of course, pay and benefits. So they were able to map these factors against our positive scores. And the excellent news is that 76 and 71% of our respondents feel very positively and very strongly about their work and about PSTA's mission. We have people here who care about what they do, and that's very important. That's a strong motivator for our employees. It also shows us some of the areas where we have some opportunities and where we're going to be targeting some initiatives over the upcoming year, including supervisor development, team building, perhaps communications surrounding change initiatives. So these are some of the areas that in our action planning today and going forward, we're going to be looking to make significant improvements. And those are the most important areas that will result in changes in the scores next year. So this afternoon's session with our leadership team is to understand the results. They were released to all employees a week and a half or so ago as soon as we received them, but we'll be going in depth with the results today. We'll be talking about the key factors and discussing opportunities for some initiatives that will allow us to make improvements in those factors and walk out with a plan, a high-level plan for our next 12 months of initiatives. So I'd love to hear any questions if you have them. I think that was a great discussion that we've had.
Looks good.
Yeah. All right. So let me bring up then Chris from TransPro, and he's going to talk to you about the other important survey that we've just completed, which is our Voice of the Customer survey. If you want to take that, I'll bring that up for you.
Good morning. Thanks, Trish. This is a good segue into the...
Can you please identify yourself
Yes,
for the
ma'am.
record, please?
Christopher Browning with TransPro Consulting. Yes, ma'am. So we had the opportunity to survey your customers, and as we've heard a little bit about some of the scorecard components that you have as an agency, we kind of were able to help you develop some of the results for that. This is wave 2 that we've done for fixed route, and these are great results. Just a couple housekeeping things. We completed the survey back in July. This is wave 2 from November of 2015 was your first wave. We surveyed about 534 customers. And I think it's important to note that when we survey 534 customers, these are, it's a statistically valid sample, but there you may hear of certain instances where you may see something wildly different from the results you see here. So individual experiences are still important, but this is the macro level of what your customers are experiencing. So just a couple quick highlights. The NPS, the Net Promoter Score, y'all familiar with that term? It's your promoters minus your detractors, and we'll go into that in a few more minutes. Essentially, and you have a Net Promoter Score of 47.9%, so 48%, a 50% increase both of the industry average of 32% and a 50% increase from Wave 1 back in 2015. So that's great news. Secondly, as Brad alluded to, on-time performance is the most important factor for customers, and fares is the second most important, and it's pretty high up there as well. We'll show that in a minute. Interestingly enough, all of your satisfaction metrics increase. So everything we asked, the service customers were either satisfied or highly satisfied more than they were in Wave 1. Feeling safe on the bus was 92%. Customer service representatives and being helpful and courteous was at 90%, so great job. The two that are a little bit lower, on the lower end of the spectrum, on-time performance of 68% and the availability and space on the bus at 73%. But again, it's important to note, everything moved up, okay? So a couple quick demographics. The age of your customers. In this wave, it trended a little bit older, so you can see that we had fewer 18 to 39-year-olds, but more 40 to 65-year-olds. A couple factors. We had 2% that we added the option to I prefer not to answer, but also the time of year that we did the survey. Doing this in July, you may have a different population base that you have in November. So again, as we go into the next couple waves, we'll start to see some trending based on seasonality, so that when you do the waves in spring, summer, you have a similar audience base that you do in fall, winter. Transit dependency. We've noticed that you have a jump from 27 to 38% folks that are choosing to ride your system. And the reasons they are choosing is because it's convenient and because they want to save money. So there's a great opportunity there to say, look, even for the folks that want to ride, they're choosing to ride, is because it's convenient for them, just as convenient as driving, and they want to save some money. So the economy is very good. The economics, I should say. So your NPS Wave 2, as we said, is 48% compared to a 32% industry average. You can see that you pulled your promoters came from both your passives and your detractors. So the way we calculate this is we ask the question, how likely are you to recommend PSTA, writing PSTA to a friend, family member, or coworker? And you have 63% that say, absolutely, yes, I'm all in. You have 0 to 6, if that's where they respond. You have 15% that say, wouldn't do it. And then in the middle, you have folks that go, sometimes I would say yes, sometimes I would say no. So we kind of take those out of the middle, and we subtract 63 from 15, and you get your 48, okay? Any questions on that? I know it's a big slide, okay? Again, just wanted to show the representation of you trending upwards from Wave 1 into Wave 2, so that is definitely positive news. As we talked about, the customer importance factors, these are all the options they had, ranging from travel time to buses arriving on time, safety on the bus, bus cleanliness, customer service representatives being helpful and courteous. And you see the top two far and away are buses arriving on time and fare price. After that is travel time. And as you mentioned a few minutes ago, this is your bus cleanliness. So it's a little further down from the impression side. They're not as, the customers are saying they're not quite as concerned with the bus being so clean, or as clean, as arriving on time. Just a couple quick metrics. I know we're short on time. Service availability, again, the buses on-time performance went from, is that right? No, I'm sorry. The buses operating the days and times that I need them to operate, going from 69 to 78%, as well as the buses are conveniently located for me, and again, moving up about 5%. Timeliness, here's your on-time performance going from 61% in Wave 1 to 68% in Wave 2, and the bus getting the travel time going from 76% to 83%. So we also asked the question, have you contacted PSTA with a complaint or concern in the last 3 months? And of your 530, about 160 had at 36%, very similar to the numbers that we had in wave 1. We also introduced this question, it's how did you contact? And you still have about 83% of your customers contacting, of those that did, contacting using telephone. Of those 36% that contacted, we asked, was your issue resolved? And they said 84% of their issues were resolved. So you're looking at, I think, about 125 or so issues were resolved, and 16% were not. And it's interesting to note that those whose issues were resolved were much more likely at that point to recommend the service as opposed to those who were not. They were actually major detractors, saying I would never do it, that type of thing. Your overall satisfaction, again, this goes back to one of the points on your scorecard. Overall satisfaction is increased if you combine both your satisfied and very satisfied. You get 87%. That's pretty great. So again, you take your 48% NPS score and your 87% overall satisfaction, and that would drop into your scorecard. Okay. Service quality over time also increased. Both you took away from the folks in the middle. Again, we asked questions, similar questions, multiple ways to make sure that we're consistent in how the customer is answering. And so in this one, you can see your improved score went up and took away from some of those that said they were about the same. So that's great news. Are there any questions about fixed route? I want to make sure that I'm good. Okay. So going to paratransit, this is the first time that we've done a survey for DART customers. And overall, everything comes up roses. There's one area, and I'll show you about it. But 280 surveys were completed. We do DART surveys a little bit differently because of the frequency of routes and the number of customers. We tried something new with y'all this time. We did initially a survey, an email survey, and we had 91 responses via email. So those customers chose to take the survey, and then we did that for about a week, and then we followed up with 189 phone surveys, and those are randomized. So results page, 78% net promoter score. That's incredible. That means y'all are hitting high marks on PSTA. Or for DART. So what we don't have here, generally speaking, looking for the NPS of paratransit is a newer thing. So I'll show you how we compare y'all to a couple of other agencies in a few minutes. Service availability and vehicles arriving on time are the most important factors. You have several factors here in the middle that you see are at 98%. So again, those are great numbers. Customers are least satisfied when feeling safe while riding the vehicle. So I have a couple slides to talk about in a few minutes of that, but that's at 55%. Very much a different number than we had seen on considering you're talking about feeling safe when boarding the vehicle at 98%. Okay. Just again, a couple quick demographics. Age of the customers, trending much older. So again, it's important to think about what's coming down the pike. What does your local economy say about the demographics of the area and where your routers are coming from? So your NPS for wave 1 was 78%. You have 83% promoters and only 5% detractors. That's really good. So like I said, we don't have it's not as common to measure across the industry for paratransit on NPS right now. So what we've done is we've taken 2 other agencies and compared you to them. So an agency A, you are quite a bit higher. You're 23 percentage points above at minimum to agency B. So again, this just gives you an idea for these paratransit systems, what that looks like. Again, similar size and that kind of thing. Okay. Importance factors for paratransit customers are service availability, being able to get the service when they need it, and the vehicles arriving on time, followed by the safety on the vehicle. So some of the metrics that we talked about the convenience, again, the awareness of the 30-minute pickup window and awareness of the no-show policy. And it's interesting that 15% of the folks don't know about that. But again, both of these are very high numbers. So again, they have that 30-minute window and then if they don't show up or the customer doesn't come out within that 5-minute window, the driver can leave. Okay. 98% feel safe when boarding the vehicle, and this is what I talked to you about. The 55% said, I'm satisfied with feeling safe while riding the vehicle. So boarding the vehicle, great, they feel great. Riding the vehicle, there's a weird dynamic here, because as I'll show you in the next 2 slides, it's counterintuitive to what they're saying on other questions. And we talked about this a little bit when we discussed with the management team when we presented the results. So it might be the next one, hold on. So talking about fixed route buses and the ability to ride those services for free. Only 26% had ridden a fixed route bus in the last 7 years, and of those 74% that said they had not, only 7% said they would ride free of charge. So it's just that's something to consider moving forward. As the costs of paratransit increase, fixed route is a much cheaper alternative to carry passengers. So again, it's looking at kind of the things behind that and potentially working on getting this number up and seeing if they're willing to ride.
So explain to me again why they have an issue with riding a fixed.
Yes, ma'am. Where's the?
Because they are disabled.
So
they have a disability. That's why they're eligible to ride DART, is because they are disabled, and they say that they cannot have any other kind of transportation. And as you saw, these are older folks. What, 70% are over 65. It's very older folks that totally rely on this system, because they can't drive a car, and most of them, except for 7%, can ride a bus. So I think that's what drives the NPS so high. They love it because they need it,
Well,
And CareRide provides a very good service. So.
is it an education issue, do you think, for the folks that wouldn't consider it?
Well, maybe. It might be.
I would think that maybe that question could trigger a fear of loss, because if you're disabled and you depend on that service and you have some financial help that pays for it, and then you indicate that you would be open to taking the bus with the trainer, I would say no, because I would be afraid that they would take my service away and they'll give you a trainer one time and then you lose that. So
Yeah.
I think I would understand how people would respond that way, because they don't want their service taken away.
So there's a lot at play there, and I think that off the top of my head, I don't recall specifically, but that is a similar number to what we've seen in other agencies. It might be a little low here, but I think it's you're going to have, as the Commissioner alluded to, when you have that service, why would I want to go walk to the bus stop when somebody will come to my door and pick me up? There's multiple avenues there, but again, it's something to just think about. And again, just like when, as you mentioned with the employee survey, it's that first step. And once they see the good faith effort, once they see, oh, okay, so I really can, they are going to provide the service still. It works for me. There's potential there. Sorry, did that answer your question?
Kind of, I guess, yeah.
So I don't have the slides in here. I must have updated afterwards. But going back to the 55% safety while riding the vehicle, what's interesting is when we ask the questions about how do you feel about the drivers and their customer service, they're friendly, they're courteous, they drive safely. All of those are at 95+%. The overall satisfaction with the drivers is at 94%. And then the other question is, do you have a mobility device? 44% of your customers say they do. And then I believe it's a 98% say that they feel secure, that the driver has fully secured them in their vehicle. So that's where we look at the 55% when they're riding the vehicle, and we're a little bit questionable as to why they said that. So again, as we discussed the other day in the management team meeting, we were presenting the results, it could be the experience or factors outside of how other people are driving, not the drivers, because they said the drivers drive well, they just don't feel safe on the vehicle. And so I think, again, as we go into wave 2 for DART and we start to see a trend, I think you're going to either see it jump dramatically or you're going to see it stay right where it is. And I think then we'll say, okay, well, maybe it was situational with a couple folks, or again, it could be a macro level economic, just how people are driving in Pinellas County. Again, there's a lot of different factors that could be at play there. Okay. Any questions? Awesome. Thank you so much.
You did a great job.
Thank you. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. Next.
Yeah.
Do you have part of the presentation?
I'm taking notes today.
You're taking notes. All right. Brad?
She was the great boots on the ground that it got all those folks to do this sort of things.
Yeah, I absolutely did.
Yeah.
Handled the project itself.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it was a lot of fun.
Okay,
Awesome.
now, James, are you on the agenda?
I'm with TransPro, so
Oh,
we were
what-
working together on the customer
Yeah.
survey, and just here to answer any additional questions.
Okay,
So the last thing on our agenda is just a look ahead to the September 26th board meeting. Of course, this month we have 2 board meetings because of the budget, so we have what I would imagine, or hope, that it would be a relatively brief public hearing on the, first public hearing on the budget next Wednesday at 6 o'clock on the 12th. And then our final public hearing will be at the beginning of the September 26th regular board meeting. And I understand perhaps that Commissioner Long, you will not be here.
I'm gonna be back that week. Is it possible for Mr. Barkley to handle that public hearing at it's the last one, correct?
On the 26th?
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I told him. He said yes.
okay, that'd be great, thank you.
So, as you can see on the agenda, that'll probably be the main item. Will be the second public hearing, and at least I think it'll go fairly smoothly. A long list of consent items that are mostly going to go to the Finance Committee between now and then. I think the one item just to highlight.
Hold on just 1 minute, Brad, give us a chance to look at this, and members, could you please help me figure out if you think any one or a few of these might someone decide they want to pull, it might be controversial.
The
I don't know.
item 6C, I believe, is going to the St. Pete City Council, or maybe it already has.
We vote on that on Thursday.
Okay. So this is the expanded downtown St. Petersburg looper service that is going to include electric vehicles, which is scheduled for a ribbon cutting at St. Pete City Hall on October 3rd. And this is the agreement for that. The St. Pete City Council will, the funding agreement approve or consider on Thursday, and then we'll have it on our agenda.
In the spirit of highlighting the positive things that we're doing, might it not be wise to take the T-BARTA program of projects off consent and do a little just dog and pony show about what they are and give it a little bit more of a focus?
Yes. Well, I actually think, Debbie, if you're watching this,
Hi,
that
Debbie.
we will be changing that. Yeah.
I mean, do the rest of
I
you
agree.
agree? I just
Totally.
think there's been so much effort and so much work. I'd rather see it as a standalone than
Mhm.
try to put it on consent and just kind of breeze through it with no real knowledge to the board about the spectacular efforts going on behind the scenes.
6F is, I think, also a interesting item that I was thinking maybe we should not be on consent.
Yeah.
Last month, we approved the design contract that is now, we've issued a notice to proceed, so
Which
we are.
one are you talking about now?
6F
Oh,
on the
here we go,
TRT.
yeah.
We're actually, we have 2 consulting contracts planned to manage the design and construction of the bus rapid transit project. We thought we were going to take them in reverse order, but we have a design contract now underway, this would be a project management and construction management contract that would oversee the design, or help us oversee the design process, and then oversee the construction. So this is an important procurement as well. And then, on the back of the page, you can see,
Brad, is there any particular reason why we split up design from the project management and construction?
there is, it's basically a lot of experience and best practice analysis that it's important to have on major capital projects like this. The Federal Transit Administration recommends it, having careful reviews all throughout the process.
Okay.
Some technical reviews that our staff couldn't necessarily do. At the legislative committee, we were talking to Harry Glenn, or to the Van Scoy, Harry wasn't on the phone, about some of the rules and regulations that FTA puts on doing risk assessments and other things. That's what this consultant will do. Be reviewing the design elements in a whole bunch of different ways throughout the process, and then they will also then be there to oversee the contractor in building of the stations and designing and purchasing the vehicles, etc. Yeah. Every project that I've ever seen, new starts or small starts, has had a separate program manager, project manager, consulting firm like this.
Okay.
It's been helpful.
To Commissioner Rice's point, does anyone else feel like the more involved we get on the PSTA board, the more we're qualifying ourselves for a PhD in transportation?
Yes.
I mean, I've learned so much about transportation since I've been on this board. It's just been an extraordinary ride.
And then you add MPO and TBARTA.
Yeah.
And yes.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, because Friday is the TMA meeting.
Oh, yeah, can't wait.
Yeah, so then you can see the items that we've talked about this morning. On the action item, the scorecard, the legislative priorities, which I think we'll actually move, because we're not going to approve that. That won't be on the agenda until the legislative committee sees it again.
We're gonna move that off.
We'll put it down as a informational item that they just can see the things we're talking about, but not approve it until October.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, sorry we'll miss you at the meeting, but it'll be a.
Well, and to that point, I just mentioned to Darden, and Commissioner Torga, are you planning on attending the TMA?
I may not be able to be there. I would
I-
love to be there.
I will be there, Brad, just so you're aware.
But
I'm gonna be late because it's grandparent day at my granddaughter's school. So
Okay.
I have to, and I'm gonna be down in Manatee attending it.
Oh, you gotta.
Okay.
So, but it's an FDOT, so
Yeah,
I should
FDOT,
be able
yeah.
to just speed right back on the interstate, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
On I-75, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So, priorities, you know.
I know about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what that is.
All right, and the rest is pretty self-explanatory. It looks like a really good agenda. We should have a very nice meeting.
Should.
You feel good?
Yes, I do.
Everybody?
Yes.
We are
Yep.
good. Do we have anything else we need to chat about today?
If I may, to the next section in the future, and I can promise you it'll be short, because I'm supposed to be at an important meeting at 11 o'clock in Dunedin. So
Right now?
Yes.
But it's
Uh.
11:25.
I understand. So I'm gonna be, I was waiting for this, but I wanted to be here for the whole meeting. Thank you very much. Future meeting subjects. We talked a little bit about it before, and we have gone to the concept of mobility, PSTA. I mentioned this in the legislative. So PSTA is obviously stands for Analysis on Coast Transit Authority. And we said we want to get away from the concept of buses, and we want to get away because we're providing mobility within the county. And we've got some other forms of transportation that we use, or transit that we use, and that gets into the ferries and the boating. And I wanted to bring this out because that counts as transit when we're
Does.
having transit rides, et cetera. And I just want to make sure that we bring that up and we see that often in the future of what we're attempting to do. So this whole concept of mobility, if we want to promote that, we don't have to change the name of PSTA. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just saying that we bring this forward, at least we have a discussion about this to see how we can improve that whole concept. For example, back in the day, if I would, in other countries, if you purchase something, you may purchase something that allows you to ride the ferries, it allows you to ride the bus system, the train system, anything else that's within the country or within that county. That may fall within here. Well, we're trying to do that now, regionally. So I think it makes a great concept of us in our planning, or at least in our thinking, so planning, executive meeting, and our full meeting, that we are looking at it from that perspective.
Mr.
I
Torres,
do.
that is a terrific point, and I cannot believe I didn't think of it myself.
Well, then you can
So
think of it.
thank you so much,
you may have a-
because what you're really talking about is branding. Branding our agency, and I would like to suggest, for the good of the order, that we move this topic as a #1 issue at our strategic planning session that we would be having early next year, Brad, don't you agree?
Yeah.
And that would be a subject matter to discuss there, because at the end of the day, I do believe that since we are authorized in state statute, it would be on our agenda for next year to maybe change the name, to reflect the changing world of transportation and how we're going about moving into Senator Brandis's #1 passion of autonomous driverless vehicles. And who knows what we'll be talking about after the first year. But
Exactly.
your point is very well taken, and I'm very grateful that you brought it up, so thank you. And now you may be excused to go on to your
Thank you,
meeting,
Madam
which you
Chair.
are very late for.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Is that good, Brad? Cassandra?
Commissioner.
I'm
What?
being given the cue that we have an action item that we have to.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes,
recommend to
the
board.
scorecard.
I'm still here.
To recommend the scorecard, which we,
To the board.
to the board, yeah.
I thought we did that.
So
but-
moved.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Done.
An enthusiastic
Thank
aye.
you. Yes. Very good meeting. We are adjourned. Thank you for your attention.
Oh,
Rachel,
yeah.
can you take us off the?
TV.
That was good.
It was actually, we had property appraiser Mike Twitty, he made a presentation about the homestead exemption impacts to our track committee.
Mhm.
And apparently, I don't know if he required